Outsiders.
Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the opinion show that is to woke identity politics, anti-Semitism and moral equivalency on steroids. What? The Me Too loving woke female solidarity, believe all women, I will not be lectured by this man about misogyny crowd is to standing up for the women and girls raped and murdered by the butchers of Hamas.
Report a crime?
Yes.
I was raped.
So sorry. We're here to help. Tell us what happened.
I was at a music festival. We heard gunfire and everyone was running. I started running and then he grabbed me. He yelled something in Arabic and then he ripped my...
Sorry to interrupt you. You said he was yelling in Arabic.
Yes.
Ah, yes, of course. In today's world of moral confusion, as this not-so-satirical cartoon sketch points out, who's in the right and who's in the wrong depends entirely upon the identity of the individuals involved.
Sorry, I just need a bit of background here. Are you Israeli?
Yes.
And your rapist was Palestinian?
He was a Hamas terrorist.
Okay, this is a bit awkward, but we can't help you.
A bit awkward indeed. Where are all those Me Too, death to the patriarchy, wear a white ribbon mob when it comes to the horrific atrocities of October 7th? Their silence has been deafening.
Don't take it personally. Management decided that all violence against Israelis is legitimate resistance. So sorry.
My daughter has been kidnapped. Please help.
Sure, just before we get started, are either of you Israeli?
As Rita said, there's more truth in that one satirical sketch than you'll find in a month's worth of ABC, Guardian or left-wing editorials and moralising and posturing about Israel and Gaza and moral equivalency. Shame on the left-wing women's movements. Not a single march for those women and girls, not a single comment, not a single gesture of support. Shame on you. I don't know how you can look yourselves in the mirror. But now, let's grab the latest Outsiders News. And Rita, before we get to the Mulgrave by-election down in Victoria, which I know Rita will have a lot to say about, on that point, James and Rita, where are all... We've had years and years of Believe All Women, the woke stuff, the Me Too marches, what were those silly pink hats and all that stuff? Women and girls were raped, mutilated and butchered in Gaza, on the outskirts of Gaza a month ago. Nothing from that whole crowd. In fact, we've had the obscenity reported yesterday of now the women's movement are trying to deny, or some of them, that anything did happen to those women in Gaza. Have a look at this. There's a Canadian university, of course it's a Canadian university, in an open letter who disputes that women were raped and sexually assaulted. They hadn't seen the footage then.
Well, this is a sexual assault centre at a Canadian university that is signed this open letter denying what we know happened. There are eyewitness accounts. There is evidence left behind of the horrors that were inflicted on these women, the mass rapes, the torture, the slaughter, and the way it has been sometimes rationalised, denied like it is there, or tried to be minimised is really quite shameful. And the sisterhood needs to be principled. If you're going to be talking about rape culture, this is real rape culture. Instead, they will be bleating about things like sexist air conditioning and so this is what the women in the West are doing.
Well, you know, this is the thing. I mean, and I think, guys, we have to, and I did say guys, we have to look at this, you know, as part of a broader problem that the left has. The left has specifically a revolutionary agenda, which we've spoken about before, and women are so often sacrificed on the altar of that revolution. And we see it time and time again. We see it now most tragically and horrifically with what happened on October 7th in Israel to hundreds and hundreds of Israeli women and girls. But We see this over and over again. We see this in the current immigration detention crisis, which we see playing out right now.
Exactly.
Suddenly, it's okay that we're releasing people who, among other things, blew up the body of a pregnant woman with military-grade explosives. But it's okay because, hey, we've got this other agenda. Women always are sacrificed when it comes to things like the trans agenda. We see this over and over again. Women's victimhood is to the left only valid if it is convenient to their broader agenda.
Exactly.
If it does not serve the left's broader agenda, that victimhood, I'm afraid, does not matter.
I remember when Julia Gillard and Joan Baez, of all people, got up in the Opera House, crowded with women and girls. This was this great support of Julia Gillard's blue tie speech or whatever. And yet when as Rita says, when real rape, real violence against women occurs, silence from the left or moral equivalency.
Well, let's not forget Julia Gillard, who was triggered by someone looking at their watch.
Yes.
Can't even define what a woman is. She was asked that a few months ago, and despite all the coverage of this issue, she floundered, gave some 4-minute explanation without answering the question.
We don't hear from any of the usual suspects. Shame on a lot of them. Mulgrave by-election. This is down in Victoria. This was the seat of Dan Andrews. So Dan Andrews has gone off, tried to join a golf club and they wouldn't have him or something. But tell us about it, Rita.
Yes, the golf club is a delicious story in itself. Well, the Labor have retained the seat, but there was quite a swing. The primary vote went back about 11%. Liberals didn't do too well. They got about 20% of the primary vote. This is the seat that Ian Cook from iCook has run in, so he got around 20% as well. I mean, the state of Victoria, I mean, you've got the debt, you've got all the corruption issues, but what happened to Ian Cook, can I just briefly say? When we had that vindication in part in court where it was found that his business was shut down incorrectly, this thriving business that employed dozens of people destroyed. No compensation. That was the ruling. No, this is the state of justice in Victoria. And, yep, we've got another Labor person in there. Meanwhile, Dan Andrews is unwanted across the Mornington Peninsula's golf courses. This is a story that's just dominating Victoria with some of his billionaire mates are trying to get him membership to several golf clubs. He loves his golf, and the folks down there, they've got better memories than he had.
Hang on, Rita. I'm sorry, but Dan Andrews should not be playing golf. Haven't you guys seen the headlines about COVID being on the rise? We know that according to Dan Andrews, golf spreads COVID. He should be staying home. Where's his mask, Rita?
Well, I haven't seen him wear a mask on a golf course yet. So
now I also want to, Rita, I'm just confused here because clearly the strength of the Liberal Party in Victoria, the strength of the opposition, I'm surprised that they didn't win this seat. I mean, you've got Dan Andrews, one of the worst premiers in Australian history, and the Liberal Party, please fill me in here.
Well,
I'm at a loss.
We had another by-election a few months ago, and you might remember the Liberals said that was a new dawn for the party. They were going to go and walk into government. They won that by-election in Warrandyte because Labor didn't run. So the Liberals have found the formula in Victoria. If they want to get elected with someone like a John Pesutto as their leader, a smaller Liberal bedwetter who stands for nothing, he's still backing the treaty, by the way. He hasn't even walked away from that.
No, you're joking. You're joking.
No,
seriously.
No. He somehow at the last minute said he was against the voice, but he's still for a treaty.
How does that work?
Try to work that out.
Speaking of the treaty, James, there's a nice segue there.
Fascinating little poll here, and I think it's really interesting, Rita, that you were talking about, a party leader who doesn't believe anything, and I think we can contrast that to Peter Dutton on the national level, who had that resounding victory for the No campaign. Everybody said no. I think it was 61-39 at the end of the day. Resounding defeat for that. The polls now show, this is a Fairfax 9 poll, that support for treaty and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or whatever it is, has slid to around a third. So even the yes voters are now turning away from that.
But that headline we just saw from the Sydney Morning Herald is saying that no, Peter Dutton should not be reading too much into the
No,
Press
of
vote.
course not.
That's what they're terrified of.
They are terrified. And the Guardian's
just-
having a full-blown
Have you
meltdown
noticed the
as
way
well.
that, by the way, the press is now so terrified of Peter Dutton because
yes.
he had a huge win this week. I think we've got to note
I'll be
the
talking
very
about that
big
later.
win
Yep.
on immigration. But you could look at the press and you see the commentators, and they're all saying, "Oh well, here comes the big Peter Dutton tough guy campaign." That shows that they're absolutely terrified. Catherine Murphy in The Guardian
that was
is having an
hilarious.
absolute heart attack over this.
Fantastic. Tell us about it.
Oh, well, she's just saying, that here comes, she's saying, here comes the big, she calls him Daddy Dutton, which is a pretty interesting sort of thing to call him. But anyway,
No
I'll leave that
comment
to the viewers' imaginations. But there's now this sort of sense among left-wing commentators that we've got this sort of muscular Peter Dutton tough guy, and they're trying to tear down that image as all being just this sort of conservative scare-em act. But of course, no, actually what he's doing is what an opposition leader should do, and he's being effective, I think, at it. And if he keeps it up, he's going to take a lot of paint off Labour at the next election.
well,
Absolutely. He's going to win the next election. I keep telling everybody, you can put your money on it now. He's going to win the next election. I guarantee. Seriously, if you have a strong opposition leader with strong convictions who stays true to the course, ignores Simon Birmingham. If Simon Birmingham, Peter walks down the corridor towards you, go blah, 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 until he's gone past. Because we saw Simon Birmingham again wetting the bed, figuratively speaking, in the Senate this week. Tell us about it, Rita.
Yes, Thursday, all the attention was in the lower house, understandably, because Labor was capitulating in spectacular fashion, taking all 6 of the coalition's amendments, and Peter Dutton really had quite an impact there. But in the upper house, in the Senate, Alex Antic was trying to refer his bill to a Senate hearing so we could hear both sides about whether children we're talking about here, under 18, should be having medical transitions, having medical treatments to change their gender. And the Labor and the Greens, obviously, they had a meltdown. They voted against this. But there were Liberals voting with Labor and the Greens, all abstaining. Shame on them. Simon Birmingham again gave a conscience vote. These conscience votes are becoming way too common.
Why do you think you won the voice, Liberals? Because you didn't have a conscience vote. Conviction that will always trump conscience votes. So Birmingham, put him in his box. Don't let him out again until after the election if the Libs want to win government. But James, take us through the details of this detainees fiasco, because this is really serious stuff. Rapists, pedophiles, murderers being released by the Albanese government with no due precaution in place ready. And it took Peter Dutton to basically be the Prime Minister while Albo was gallivanting off around with Gwen Stefani or whoever. We had Peter Dutton leading the country with conviction and principles. Take us through the details.
So essentially, now, there have been 93, I believe, released, but they have also flagged that there's another 300 or more potentially still in.
And why are they released?
Now, why are they released? Because the High Court said, oh, well, we can't keep people in indefinite detention. Now, let's be really clear. These are people here who were here came in as refugees, and they wound up getting charged. They committed really heinous crimes, really heinous crimes. Sexual assault, rape of children. One of them is alleged to have murdered and blown up the body of a pregnant woman in Malaysia with military-grade explosives, and has been told, oh, no, we can't send them back to Malaysia because they might get the death penalty. Well, tough luck maracas on that one. But there's all these hideous criminals. Now, the High Court was coming down with this ruling. The Labour government, the Albanese government, had no plan for if the High Court went the other way. So it was up to the Liberals and it was up to Peter Dutton to basically take them by the hand and introduce very tough legislation, say, OK, these people are on ankle monitors, they're monitored. If they slip up, they're back in jail. All of this, though, How
could their emergency legislation that Labor formulated not have those measures? These are basic.
Well, exactly. And also, there's a lot of questions, too, Rita, about the timing of when they actually wrote the legislation, because they claimed that they had this stuff in the works. Well, I've seen no evidence of it, and the press gallery has questioned the Prime Minister's office, but they've seen no evidence that it was, drafted a long time ago and was ready to go there. This was a complete stuff-up by the Albanese government. Peter Dutton, as Rowan said, I think, basically led them by the hand. The Greens, of course, screamed, which shows that Dutton was on the right ticket. But
Exactly.
Labour had no other option
and
here.
it's also worth pointing out that this, coincidentally or otherwise, this was the first ruling, I think, under the new High Court leadership of the new very left-wing, the most left-wing Chief Justice that we've had in 14 years, appointed by the Albanese government. The country's being pushed further and further left by the Albanese government. People of Australia need to resist this, and this is why I guarantee you Dutton will win the next election, because there's no way the people of Australia are going to tolerate the sort of madness we've seen from this government. Briefly, the anti-Semitism thing has reared its head again during the week, Rita. Down in Melbourne, this hideous mural that was being painted. We've had kill Jews graffitied around the place. And no leadership from Labor, note, none.
These murals, from what I understand, were funded by local government councils, and this is in a very Jewish part of Melbourne, Balaclava. There's quite a sizable Jewish population there. And not surprisingly, perhaps, the artist who's responsible for these works, if you have a look at his Instagram page, you might find attendance at pro-Palestinian rallies and all sorts of statements about freeing Palestine.
So
I guess if you put those two things together, you might come up with some conclusions.
Those cartoons, if you know your history of anti-Semitic cartoons...
They look very, very, very much like the sort of propaganda you would have seen in Germany or Russia in the 20s and 30s, or even earlier than that. And I mean, I think, Rita, I just think the word artist is doing a very heavy lift there when you describe him as such.
We'll come back, we'll discuss, there's lots more to discuss on all these issues, but first let's go quickly to London, where Esther Kraku has stayed up late to be with us, as she does. Esther, great to see you, as always. We've had a big week here, but wow, what a week you've had in politics in Britain. David Cameron, it's like a zombie in a Michael Thriller video coming up out of the grave, and he's back. I thought we'd seen the last of that bloke. But anyway, he's back. Tell us about it, Esther.
Yeah, so Lord Cameron, which I still...
Lord Cameron, indeed.
Actually, I throw up in my mouth a little bit having to say that. He's back. He's been brought back from the dead. He's like a throwback nobody asked for. It's like if people brought back Westlife and you just think, why do we want to see middle-aged men trotting around on stage like they're in their 20s? This is exactly what it's like with David Cameron. The reality is he's quite unpopular with the nation, but he's deeply unpopular amongst the conservative right. I mean, the whole debacle you've seen in the last 10 years in Britain over Brexit and this kind of fight back against this globalist agenda has been against people like David Cameron. So to bring him back into the cabinet, someone who resigned from the party, like some sort of corpse resurrecting from the grave, just kind of highlights how desperate the Tories are. Now, he is in the role as in the cabinet as a foreign secretary, which is, I believe, a largely ceremonial role. This is up for debate, but he doesn't have any real power, at least domestic power, and that's pretty good because he's not an elected official. But now he is making noise because he is trying to increase the UK's international aid budget, which is obviously very contentious because we're in a cost of living crisis and people are questioning why he wants to send more of our money abroad when there are thousands of homeless people that are not even getting a place to stay, but we're spending millions of pounds a day to house asylum seekers and people coming across the channel on boats. So obviously Lord Cameron is not going down as well as people thought, and that's no surprise to anyone with half a brain.
Rita.
Well, Labor are headed for a certain victory, it looks like, if the polls are accurate. Are we going to see another challenge to the Tory leadership? Because Rishi Sunak seems to be, hopeless. Suella Braverman's letter was just damning in detailing his many failures. Could she challenge possibly, or somebody else who's got a bit more conservative credentials?
Well, at the moment, Conservative leadership is a bit of a poison chalice because it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now, obviously, Rishi Sunak's leadership is not going as positively as he would have hoped. But the reality is there's very little to stop the sinking ship of the Conservative Party. I was saying that one must die in order to be reborn, and it might actually take some years in opposition for the Tories to become a Conservative Party. They are the biggest opposition to conservatism here in Britain. And it's really unfortunate. With Suella Braverman, obviously, she's been keeping Rishi's feet to the fire, particularly with the fact that the Supreme Court earlier this week called the Rwanda scheme unlawful. And so that's, put a bit of a delay in the government's plans. But Rishi Sunak has said that he's adamant of getting planes to Rwanda by the spring, or at the very least before the next general election. That's doubtful, particularly according to Suella Braverman, who says that his new plan is just tinkering at the edges. At the end of the day, you have to effectively nullify the courts or the European Convention of Human Rights influence on the Rwanda scheme to make it happen. But the idea that Suella Braverman might be making a challenge for leadership, that is possible. It's likely to happen after the election. But again, Conservatives have to be careful because she has a very strong stance on immigration, which most people in the Conservative Party agree with. And actually many working class red wall Labour voters would agree with as well. Immigration in this country is just ridiculous. We're going to see figures next week published that will likely show that net immigration into Britain has exceeded 1 million in the last few years, which is ridiculous
James?
for a tiny island.
This is
but it's important.
I just want to ask Esther on this. I mean, tell us exactly, because I couldn't understand what Suella Braverman had done to fall afoul of the Sunak government, except, I guess, be too conservative. Where do Conservatives now in Britain go? And I mean, if the Tories aren't going to stand up for borders, for national sovereignty, for all of these very basic principles, which, as you say, many working class Labour voters would agree with as well, they seem to be perfectly sensible, and instead is captured by this elite perspective, which seems to think that the borders should be always open and anybody should be able to come in at any time and be settled. Where do Conservative voters go?
Well, this is the issue, because I think the overarching issue that we are seeing here is not necessarily the fact that Suella Braverman is actually, has conservative principles, but because the party is lacking in actual talent and people with political acumen. She became a bit radioactive because she made some incendiary comments about the fact that homeless people that set up tents, it's become a bit of like a lifestyle. And obviously it was very controversial here because she was effectively saying that homelessness is a lifestyle. And she also published an article with the Times without the approval of Downing Street to redact certain statements. So she did have a bit of infighting with Rishi Sunak in that respect. But I think the real point is an acute lack of political will, because actually she was fired for being the one time where she was right, and she is right on many occasions, but this time she was completely spot on, particularly with regards to the police's bias when it comes to policing the pro-Palestinian protests, the fact that they've effectively been very lax in their approach to certain types of protests. So she was spot on. Her stance on immigration and illegal immigration, and the fact that we need to curb this wave of channel migrants coming over. She is right, but at the end of the day, you have to take that strong political stance and mix it with political acumen. And unfortunately, that's not really something that you've seen amongst our politicians across the board. So that's something that made her position with Rishi Sunak untenable.
The problem you've got there, Esther, is the same problem we have in certain local Liberal governments here, which is the bedwetters. The bedwetters of the Conservative Party. You've got two terrific. You've got Kemi Badenoch, you've got Suella Braverman. Yes. You've got some great Conservatives in that party, and I hope they'll come to the fore. But just very quickly, the BBC, up to their normal tricks, Esther. Just going to quickly play you what they reported about Israel blowing up, supposedly, Israel's tactics in Gaza. Have a listen first.
We are hearing from Reuters that is reporting that it says its forces are carrying out an operation against Hamas in Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, and they are targeting people, including medical teams as well as Arab speakers.
Now, that's the greatest blood libel of all time, that the Israelis were targeting Arab speakers and medics, when in fact the report was that they were taking them with them into the hospital to help. The BBC then had to put this apology forward. Have a listen.
And now an apology from the BBC. BBC News, as it covered initial reports that Israeli forces has entered Gaza's main hospital. We said that medical teams and Arab speakers were being targeted. This was incorrect and misquoted a Reuters report. We should have said IDF forces included medical teams and Arabic speakers for this operation. So we apologise for this error, which fell below our usual editorial standards. The correct version of events was broadcast minutes later.
I would have thought it is their usual broadcasting standards. Esther, what your thoughts on that controversy?
Yeah, ironic as well. Yes, you would think so. I mean, this is the second major gaffe that the BBC has made over this conflict. The first was obviously broadcasting that Israel had struck a hospital when it was actually a Hamas rocket, and now they're suggesting that the IDF were actually targeting Arab medics when they were actually bringing them in. Because they were conducting a military operation at the Al-Shifa hospital. But the issue here is obviously credibility, because if you have our state broadcaster that has had many gaffes, that has taken very clear political partisan positions, making this kind of mistake in a very heated conflict where you're seeing thousands and thousands of people take to the streets, you've seen a rise in anti-Semitism and hate speech and all of the brouhaha that's going along with this conflict. This is deeply irresponsible. And you really have to wonder, what editorial standards are they referring to? Because we're yet to see them.
Absolutely. Here. Esther Kraku, always great to speak to you from London. Thanks so much. After the break, Rita's reality check. Plus, we look at the digital ID wallet with Rob Roos, the EU MP, who'll be speaking to us live in a tick. Don't go away.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi. Coming up, we'll be looking at the latest examples of wackadoodle antics in academia and lefty lunacy. But first, let's check in on the leader of the free world, President Joe Biden, who seemed rather confused. What are you doing there, Joe? OK, now he doesn't know where he is. You're at the APEC summit, Joe, in San Francisco. It's OK. He's looking as sharp as a tack. The poor guy, he doesn't know what's happening. That is your commander-in-chief, folks. That's what we call him. Here we're in safe hands right there. Yes, that's real footage of the president again appearing to be thoroughly confused as he took the stage with other leaders at APEC. That came after he botched the name of the venue and refused to mention a US corporation for fear of mispronouncing it. Footage of Joe looking dazed and confused is becoming all too common. Here he is a couple of months ago in Maui having a moment. Yeah, who knows what's going on in that brain of his. And when he does speak, when he goes off script, well, anything can happen. Here he is at APEC again answering a question, but this time he answers it honestly, for once, and that caused Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to wince so hard he may have hurt himself.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
No, Joe, stick to the diplomatic answer. They crafted for you in full anticipation of the dictator question being asked. Our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he stuck to the script. He refused to label Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. No, Airbus Albo just noted that China has a very different political system. Well done there, champ. Now to the sorry state of the media, and in particular the biased reporting of the Israeli-Hamas conflict. It's not just the leftist media here in Australia. As you just heard, the BBC's erroneous reporting on the conflict has inspired several retractions and another comedy skit.
39 days after Hamas freedom fighters peacefully attacked Israel, we have now an exclusive interview with its leader, Yahya Sinwar.
Yes, good evening, Rachel. Let me just correct you. Oh. There were also freedom rapists and freedom butchers.
Of course, I apologize. Mr. Sinwar, I understand that you are now working towards a ceasefire.
Yes, Rachel, you know me. Wherever there is fire, I say, let's seize it. All we are saying is give ceasefire a chance.
The fire must be seized.
This is the latest work of comics from political satire show Eretz Nerdat, and they did not miss.
Can you imagine all we want is a little time to rearm before we continue to kill them, and they won't let us?
I'm sorry, Mr. Sinwar. I can't hear you. All this noise in the background.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rachel. There is a baby here.
Could you please get him to be quiet?
Yeah, I wish I could. is not mine, and his mother is in Israel. Never mind.
Okay, look, it's really hard to conduct an interview with this noisy kidnapped baby. Is he always like that?
At night, it's even worse, Rachel. Every time we fire a rocket, he wakes up.
Oh, no.
I didn't have one good night sleep in a month.
Wait, are you telling me that there is an Israeli baby that's torturing you by sleep deprivation?
Yes!
Occupying your house?
Yes!
So unfair, so unfair.
Brilliant. But if you think we can't produce hard-hitting, darkly hilarious political satire like that, then think again. We have the Tens, The Project, and they gave us this champagne comedy just this week featuring Francesca Albanese.
In your view, what would the correct response have looked like?
The response was to be given in terms of law enforcement, because Gaza is occupied and it's under belligerent occupation. So Israel has powers to enforce the law and to pursue all security measures that are deemed necessary, considering that this is occupied territory. It could have relied on the United Nations to demilitarize Hamas if this was the target.
Oh, it's good.
Great work, Walid. Great work. I didn't know he was a comedy genius. Thanks.
Superb work there, team. Just superb. Sadly, Francesca Albanese is not a comedian. She is, in fact, a UN mouthpiece, gentlemen. Oh dear. Okay. Tell me, Francesca, if Gaza is occupied, then why are the Israelis invading it now during a war? Shouldn't they already be there? Are you really suggesting the Israelis should have had a law enforcement response? You do realise that Hamas has ruled Gaza since 2007. So you wanted the Israelis to have, politely asked Hamas to arrest Hamas? And then perhaps Hamas could put Hamas on trial? You even said there Israel should have depended on the UN to demilitarise Hamas. How exactly would that work, Francesca? You really think the US, Canada, Australia wants to have troops on the ground in Gaza rounding up mass murdering jihadis? Or are we going to rely on these UN peacekeepers to demilitarise Hamas? Those same UN peacekeepers who watched the Tutsis being slaughtered in Rwanda, did nothing as Islamic State slaughtered and enslaved Yazidis. We haven't forgotten that. No, leave the comedy to the professionals, Francesca, please.
Great work, Rita. Well, Europe is one step closer to bringing in its insidious digital ID. The European digital identity could be used for birth certificates, medical certificates, bank accounts, tax returns, university applications. The list goes on and on. But it's quite rightly raising very serious privacy concerns. This digital wallet is, well, it's tyranny on your iPhone. Joining us now to discuss this, from Europe, EU MP Rob Roos. Last time we had Rob Roos on, it was great after he'd exposed the certain things going on with Pfizer. We don't need to go into that one now, but that was great work, Rob. You were terrific on that. Now you're belling the cat on this digital ID. This is really sinister stuff, and it's getting closer and closer. Tell us why you're afraid of it.
The European Parliament and the member states reached an agreement last week on the digital identity. And that's an instrument that is pushed top down, an instrument nobody asked for. And despite so many warnings, so many security specialists and privacy experts sounding the alarm clock, they still reached an agreement. And especially in the Netherlands, this is extremely controversial. A parliamentary majority demanded that the Deputy Minister for Digitalization would not agree to this in the EU, but she did it anyway, which begs the question, what is the status of our parliament? Are we still a democracy? They're really pushing this thing.
James?
And tell us, what exactly is this thing? What does this identity passport mean? What would it be able to control? And I presume that's what is happening here, is they're selling it as an idea that, oh, your life will be more convenient and that there'll be all these sorts of, things that you can do and freedoms that you'll have and all of this, but that, in fact, actually, you could flick a switch and it could become very sinister. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you would have a so-called wallet on your phone where your personal data is stored in. And that's indeed all kinds of information, medical, insurance, diplomas, but also online purchases. And your whole life can be stored in that thing. With one click, you would provide government organizations and companies with your personal data. It would supposedly be convenient, and that's how they sell it. It will save you time when you want to rent a car abroad, they say.
Wow.
And,
wow.
Well,
that happens a lot.
Yeah, in my entire life, I had no problem renting a car abroad. Exactly. I don't need a digital identity wallet for that.
Well, Rob, could this be a digital ID card be used to measure things like, I don't know, your carbon emissions, your spending patterns, what you're looking at on the internet, it's on your phone. Just how far-reaching could this data collection be?
Yes, it goes very far. What I said, nobody asked for this. It's a solution in search of a problem. and I'm afraid these problems will emerge very soon. First, they say it will be voluntary. They always say it's voluntary, but we saw that also with the COVID passports. Within a few months, we needed it to enter a restaurant, a bar, or a gym. Yeah. And I wanted to stress out this point: when the government has access to certain infrastructure, it will always use it, always. Governments are always looking for more power and more control. If infrastructure is there, it will be used. Maybe not immediately, but it's just a matter of time. And another risk is that companies will ask for more data than they have a right to at the moment. And there is another risk, and that is that your personal data is just not safe. The bigger the IT project, the bigger the chance of a government failure. Rest assured that on day one of the introduction of the digital identity wallet, our enemies will start looking for ways to access our personal data. This will be the number one target for cyber attacks. We do not want foreign governments or governments to get access to our bank accounts, to our medical records, but also they should not know who is in the military service, etc., because there is so much information on it, and if they steal it, it's really a problem. And what you say about they can go further.
Ron, I guess the question that I have, though, I mean, you talk about foreign enemies, but frankly, after COVID, I'm pretty worried about domestic enemies of freedom as well. Not to sound paranoid, but where I see this being a real concern is that we had a health crisis 3 years ago with COVID, if you want to call it that, or the maintenance of a crisis was used to attack all sorts of freedom. Next time around, there may be some other crisis declared, and you need a crisis against hate speech or a crisis against the climate or whatever. And so this pass could be used to restrict your freedoms to do things in a free society. Is this a potential danger of this?
It certainly is. First, they said the digital identity, it was 3 years ago, I started talking about this already, and they say it's a conspiracy theory. We should not talk about this. And now it's here. And immediately when the agreement was reached last week, European Commissioner Breton said, now we have this digital identity wallet, we need to put something in it. And he suggested that the central bank digital currency would be put into this. And that's another so-called conspiracy theory that is now officially announced to become policy. Especially the combination of these two instruments is very dangerous, because this is how governments can create 100% control over people's life. It's a social credit system, and this is exactly how the Chinese control 1.4 billion Chinese people. And the carbon budget, that can be the next thing. We had already a prominent Dutch banker, Barbara Basma, here in the Netherlands, and she advocated openly in the media this would be a good solution. And a Dutch research institution already conducted studies on the effectiveness of a carbon budget. So I don't think this is still a conspiracy theory anymore. I think this could be a frightening reality in the near future.
Rob Roos, you do fantastic work there in the European Parliament. You did great work on belling the cat on Pfizer and the vaccines. You're doing a terrific job on this digital ID. It's a warning for us all. Thank you so much, and we'll speak again. And keep up the great work. Thank you, Rob Roos, from the European Parliament there. Don't go anywhere. Favourites, Wackademia, Lefty Lunacy, lots coming up in a tick on Outsiders. You're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow, and with myself, Rowan Dean. And thank you so much for watching us each and every Sunday morning. We do appreciate it. Now, it's nearly Christmas, and if you're looking for the ideal Christmas present, you can pre-order my book, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries, which is coming out in just over a week's time. It's my own recollections of Dame Edna and Sir Les, plus interviews and reminiscences from all sorts of people who knew and spent time with Barry as an artist and actor. His thoughts on politics from Bruce Beresford, Geoffrey Rush, Steve Vizard, Alan Jones, Andrew Bolt, they're all in there, plus childhood friends and family. I spent a lovely morning with Barry's wonderful sister Barbara. It's all here in my new book, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries. And best of all, there's lots and lots of Barryisms. So you can order it from wilkinsonpublishing.com.au. And as Sir Les himself would say, why not slip her one under the Christmas tree? You can order it right now, wilkinsonpublishing.com.au. The Many Lives of Barry Humphries. Now it's time for Instant Karma, our favourite section here, and this is where the woke or the lefties or whoever it is comes up against what John Lennon called instant karma, where, well, it comes back to bite you. In this instance, a woman, a Muslim woman in Israel, living in Israel, posted after October 7th her celebration of the Hamas attacks. Well, the Israelis saw it on social media and turned up to tell her they were sending her back to Gaza. Have a look.
اسمعيني شوي زين انت موقف استنى شوي زين انت موقفه في اتهام في نشر كلمات مديح تعاطف وتشجيع العمل الارهابي لا دعم استنى شوي دعم مستحيل تعريض حيازه الاعلانات تعرض على العنف والارهاب الكشف عن الانتماء الى منظمه ارهابيه
Don't send me back to Gaza. There you go. Instant karma. Now let's have a bit of wackademia as well. We've got students at Dublin University. This is horrible stuff.
She should be sent to Gaza, this one.
Have a look at this one.
I support Hamas. History is made that day. Very proud of my people. Very, very proud. Would love it if they would do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
So she's proud of mass rape, torture, slaughter, babies being beheaded, families burnt alive, women being gang raped and brutally killed. What is she doing in the West?
Feminist.
At a university.
What is she doing in the West?
Durham University, student there at Durham University, and before that we had a character at Dublin University at a debate who started ranting Alu Akbar and all the rest of it.
And all the lefties who see fascism and Nazism and dog whistles
trigger warning,
everywhere.
safe spaces.
When someone is actually advocating for the murder of Jews again and again and again, like she was, Where are they?
What happened, Rita? You remember, Rita, when, a few years back when the whole big debate on Twitter was whether or not it was all right to punch a Nazi, and lefty Twitter said, oh, yeah, let's punch a Nazi. And, of course, what they meant was punch a Trump supporter. What they didn't mean was actually punch somebody who wanted to murder Jews in the most heinous ways. That would be an actual Nazi, guys. But, we don't punch them, probably because they'd punch
This
back.
is how far the gaslighting has gone in the West, where Donald Trump, the most pro-Israel president America's ever seen, was painted as some sort of a Nazi, anti-Semitic, fascist ogre, and his supporters likewise. And yet, when we are seeing people who have got this deep hatred of Jews, it's not just Israel. They might say, no, this is an Israeli issue.
This is the thing. This is the key. This is what everybody needs to take away from it. Yes, this is anti-Semitism, but this is also about the war within the West for the soul of the West. And this fight here that is happening right now, what we are seeing with that young person, what's happening at university campuses around Australia, around America, around Europe, is a sickness. And it is about the fight over whether or not we remain countries that have a liberal democratic outlook, or whether we slide down towards some sort of leftist totalitarianism, because what we're seeing here, all of this is not just about undermining Israel, it is about undermining the freedoms we all enjoy.
Well, and that was, again, evident when you see at these rallies in Australia, and there's going to be rallies in Melbourne and Sydney again today, or as
I think you mean
Amnesty International says, Naam and Gadigal. And that's this is the part of the anti-West agenda.
That's
to
the
say
undermining.
we are not legitimate. The real names of these places are Naam and Gadigal, not Melbourne and Sydney. And it's that same philosophy. And if you actually listen to what is said at these rallies, they repeatedly link the Palestinian cause.
There we go.
With
Let's
the
have a look at this. So you can see at the
cause.
bottom of your screen there. So this is a Palestine Solidarity
brackets,
Action.
Melbourne.
Right at the bottom. There you go. Naam, brackets Melbourne, Gadigal, brackets Sydney. This stuff drives me
So this is a
completely nuts.
complete
So you come
lie.
to Sydney Airport now and there's Gadigal everywhere. People voted no. They voted no. So 60% of Australians, we really have to speak up and make our voices heard and say, no, we don't want this. It's called Melbourne. It's not called Naam, and it's called Sydney. If we're going to start giving places multiple names, that way is just division and chaos. Let's unite together, which is what the people said in the no vote, rather than this endless division, James.
Well, it's not just about uniting, but it's also about rejecting this model, the same academic idea about Israel, that is an illegitimate settler colonial state and a European project, is the exact same rhetoric, that they use about Australia. And if you go on Twitter, you will find many activists saying, Hamas was right, wouldn't be bad to see the same sort of thing here. And this is the same logic, that anything that is a settler colonial state is therefore illegitimate, therefore any resistance is justified, therefore all sorts of atrocities are justified, and that's where we are.
And the left do make this point repeatedly. Even very high-profile academics did that after October 7, when they said, well, did you think decolonisation was going to be peaceful? So when they talk about decolonisation, when you hear these terms, and it's repeated here about white settlement, illegitimate settlement, we're on stolen land,
all that stuff.
Always was, always will
yeah.
be. When you hear that sort of rhetoric, that is where it's coming from. It's the same philosophy. It's not just restricted to Israel and Gaza or American universities. We are having it right here, and you better wake up to it, because it's
100%. But let me just say, James, the poison comes from the universities. And this stuff, the majority of Australians do not agree with it, as we saw in the Voice referendum, as we would see in any referendum on any cultural issue. You would get similar 60, 70% of Australians would say, no, thank you. And you get this 30% or 40% say, oh, no, we quite like this stuff. The reality is this poison is infused corporate Australia, and it is infused political and academic Australia. And the problem is, and this is why Labor is so dangerous, to a man and a woman within the Labor Party, this is what they're marinated in. They've never held jobs, real jobs. They're from the union movements, through universities that believe all this stuff. So you have a Labor Party that completely believes in their heart of hearts all this stuff. And for political reasons, they pretend that they don't, but they do. And this is why it was so important to have proper, moral, conservative leadership from Peter Dutton this last week, and in fact since The Voice, since they came out against The Voice. This is what we need to see right through to the next election, and I guarantee you, if the Liberals stay strong and stay committed, forget the bedwetters, forget your Simon Birminghams, get rid of them. Liberals stay strong and committed right through to on every one of these cultural issues, transgenderism, climate change. You've got to abandon net zero, folks. You've got to get on with that. Stay true to all these things, and you will win big time, because people are not going to put up with this garbage from Labor. We've had the veil ripped off. We've seen in the last couple of weeks what Labor is really all about, James.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned academia before there, too, because it's really important to note that this isn't something new that has just come out in the last few years. This actually goes back, if you want a little history lesson, go back to the 50s, go back to the 60s, go back to the French universities.
Yes.
And people like Herbert Marcuse, Frantz Fanon, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a tremendous anti-Semite. They wrote and put the playbook in place for this settler colonial violence decolonization regime. They wrote books and books and books that have been marinating in the academy for decades now and finally coming to fruition, calling for violent ends and saying this violence is redemptive. It's happened in Israel, but they want it to happen elsewhere too, mark my words.
Well, it started in academia. The left's marched through the institutions. It hasn't ended there. You mentioned, Ryan, one of the more sinister things is in recent years is that this has taken a hold in the corporate world, in the private sector, where you would think sanity would prevail. No, these kids are running HR departments, they're leading companies, and this stuff is everywhere now. It's in government institutions, of course it's in academia, it's in the culture. You look at the celebrities and what they preach and what they're mouthing, what the kids are seeing on TikTok. It's a dangerous space we're in right now, and that's why it's so important for Conservatives to get some backbone, to take a stand. Otherwise, you're not going to have anything to conserve soon.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. After the break, well, criminals get freed into our communities while Airbus Albo jets off again with Gwen Stefani. Peter Dutton steps into the top job, as he will in 18 months' time. In a tick, Outsiders. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. I want to talk this morning about leadership. And I want to start by showing a speech of moral clarity from a Conservative leader, Margaret Thatcher, speaking about the issue which again raised its head in Australia this week, sending back illegal immigrants to their country of origin.
Those who are illegal immigrants will be returned, and it is customary international law for countries to receive their own immigrants back into their country. And if the right honourable gentleman is suggesting that we ever get to a position when you cannot return illegal immigrants to their country of origin, then he is proposing international chaos.
Precisely. International chaos. Well said, Margaret Thatcher. International chaos is precisely what we are witnessing after decades of weak leadership from all sides of politics. Illegal immigrants pouring out of Africa and into Europe, illegal immigrants pouring in across the US southern border, and of course into Great Britain and Northern European countries, creating massive social unrest. And the issue popped up here again last week with the Albanese Labor government yet again displaying a complete and utter vacuum of moral clarity. Instead, Anthony Albanese and his cronies, led by the appalling Penny Wong, are sinking in a toxic moral sludge of moral confusion, identity politics, and yes, in my opinion, anti-Semitism. How else do you explain the fact, as we were discussing earlier, that the Labor government was perfectly prepared to release into the Australian community without first announcing any or preparing any safeguards convicted murderers, rapists and pedophiles who have not only committed offence against Australians, but in all likelihood, according to Peter Dutton, would offend again, putting Australian women and children at profound risk. This is one of them. He killed a female who was pregnant, he shot her, and then blew her body up with explosives. Albanese was quite happy to go gallivanting overseas with pop stars, knowing full well that this bloke was about to be released with a free roof over his head. Oh, and by the way, this outrageous decision came on the heels of Albanese's new appointment of the Chief of the High Court, regarded by some as the most left-wing High Court judge in 14 years. As Peter Dutton rightly pointed out, the single most important job of a Prime Minister is to keep the people of this nation safe. But where is Albanese? This matter has been on the books since June.
I think it is completely and utterly unconscionable that the Prime Minister has not been here to deal with this matter. The safety and security of the Australian population is the first charge of any leader of this country, and this Prime Minister is missing in action. I would have been happy to sit down with the Prime Minister at any time during the course of this week, overnight, this morning. Was he at the briefing? No, because he's on his plane to another overseas destination.
Yes, Anthony Albanese was quite happy to release into the Australian community some 84 individuals and potentially many, many more to come, who, as I said, included convicted murderers, rapists and pedophiles, highly likely to reoffend, while he, Anthony Albanese, headed off yet again overseas to take selfies with the glitterati, the pop stars and the presidents around the globe. Here he is hobnobbing at a conference featuring Gwen Stefani, heaven help us, Justin Trudeau, Kamala Harris and the Bidens. This is what is known as leadership Labour style, sucking up to the lefty woke elites. The only leadership we have seen this week, and indeed the only leadership we have seen in this country since the beginning of the year, is from Peter Dutton.
I would have been happy to sit down with him and negotiate a regime that we could pass by legislation that would see these people come back into detention, to see the threat that is imminent, to see the threat that is real to women and children in our country, dealt with and dispensed today. But the Prime Minister has taken a deliberate decision to abandon the Australian people when they most need him. When they most need him. And I think there are many Australians at the moment who are shaking their head in disbelief at a Prime Minister who has the opportunity to address this and has had the opportunity since June to address this so that these people would not have been released in the first place, and has chosen other priorities above the Australian public.
And what were those priorities of Mr Albanese's? The ridiculous voice referendum, which 2 out of every 3 Australians comprehensively rejected, and which caught Albo and his team, as it were, with their pants down. Out of touch and flat-footed and nothing but petulant excuses telling Australians we're all racists because of how we voted. Then it's straight off overseas for more selfies around the world. A Prime Minister in love with his own image as a globe-trotting summiteer, hobnobbing with the rich and famous. Even Leo DiCaprio doesn't get around as much as this bloke. Back at home, acting Prime Minister Richard Marles had to go scurrying off to Peter Dutton to work out how to fix the problem of the detainees being released. As Dennis Shanahan wrote in The Australian, quote, Peter Dutton is now running the political and legislative agenda from the opposition leader's office, while Anthony Albanese is overseas. In practical and political terms, the Albanese government has been caught with its pants down and handed leadership to Dutton because of its own failure to prepare for an adverse court decision and a complete misreading of the popular mood. End of quote from Dennis. Caught with your pants down once is bad enough, but twice? Oh, hang on, there's a third. Exactly a week ago at this time, live on Insiders, Penny Wong landed the Albanese in hot water again with her ignorant and ill-founded undergraduate comments about the Israelis, ceasefires and hospitals in Gaza, which drew the ire of Jewish organisations from around the world.
Israel should do everything it can to observe international humanitarian law. We have seen a harrowing number of civilians, including children, killed. This has to end. And we are particularly concerned with what is happening with medical facilities.
Yet again, the only moral leadership on this issue we got was from Peter Dutton.
When people talk about Israel having to show restraint, it's completely and utterly the wrong time for that sort of language. It's a time to stand with the people of Israel to make sure that these women and children in particular are recovered from what is a very dire situation.
Peter Dutton also called for a national cabinet to deal with anti-Semitism in this country. That was ignored by Labor and the Greens. Here, by the way, is a sign on a wall. No, it's not Berlin in 1938, but it's Sydney in 2023. Clearly, we do have a problem with anti-Semitism in this country. And, may I tactfully opine, that problem is not entirely unlinked to large-scale immigration from certain strictly Islamic countries. But Labor simply refuses to acknowledge or treat anti-Semitism with the seriousness it deserves, equating it instead with the concept of Islamophobia. And Labor is bringing in 500,000 more people from overseas, the highest intake we've ever had. Well, John Howard disagrees, saying on Friday night at a visit to a synagogue that he is ashamed of the way the Jewish community has been treated in recent weeks, and that, quote, all decent Australians feel the same, share that shame. Well said, John. A Prime Minister who is not afraid to show moral leadership in his time, and still. And finally, allow me to also point to my friend Miranda Devine, who summed it up very simply this week in a tweet. Quote from Miranda, "War is hell, but it really isn't hard to know which side to support. And it's not the one that bakes a baby alive in an oven, gang rapes women, and hacks an injured man's head off with a shovel." End of quote. Well said, Miranda. Certainly no lack of moral clarity there either. I simply say to Australians, the Albanese government has shown itself to be reckless on anti-Semitism, ignorant of the values of mainstream Australia, and incapable of moral leadership, devolving that role instead to Peter Dutton. The next election cannot come soon enough. So, Rita, Barbara Streisand tells us that if Trump wins the next election, she's going to leave the States.
Again, because we had these assurances from these celebrities back in 2016, James, and none of them left America. So, you know what? It's the boy who cried wolf. I've heard this again and again. And Barbara Streisand, during Trump's term, actually claimed that Trump was making her fat. That was a legitimate story, that she was so depressed that she was eating too many pancakes or something.
Rita, I think you're missing, there's something very, very sinister here, I think, you know, when you see people like Barbara Streisand threatening to leave the United States, what I suspect is going on, it's a leftist ploy to encourage voter fraud by Trump voters and get them to vote more than once so that they can delegitimize any Trump victory, because, of course, Trump voters, when they hear that Barbara Streisand is going to leave the country, are going to be awfully tempted to say, I'm going from polling place to polling place to make that happen.
Fantastic. Now, listen, speaking of Trump, great speech he made on anti-Semitism, by the way, last week. We'll play that to you.
I thought he was a Nazi.
Well, exactly.
Come on. Worst
superb.
Nazi ever.
And, you know, as Rita said earlier in the show, the greatest friends Israel has ever had, the Jews have ever had, is Donald Trump. And here in Australia, Tony Abbott, I would argue. But I digress. The point is the January 6th so-called insurrections, which...
Insurrection?
Well,
Please.
James, talk us through it as we have a look at the footage that's now been released of the riots and craziness and mayhem. Oh, here they are, storming the Capitol building.
So remember, Rowan, during the Black Lives... Remember, guys, during the Black Lives Matter Summer of Love riots, and CNN put up that chyron saying it was a mostly peaceful protest? I actually think they were confused because here's your mostly peaceful protest right here. These Capitol Hill police are being more welcoming to these guys than U.S. Homeland Security is to illegal immigrants coming across the southern border. This footage has all been released, and there's tons and tons more.
Those two cops are so concerned that they're having a chat
They're having a
themselves.
chat. Hey, mate, do you want to go get a coffee? You know. So this is really interesting because the new House Speaker, who some people have criticized, has come through and said, you know what, I'm going to put all of this on the public record. And there's tons and tons and tons, hours and hours and hours of this footage here. And what it shows is that actually most of the people who went through the Capitol are just having a wander through on the day. Now, many people who were involved with this have been locked up for months, if not years. Years.
Some of them
in a DC
solitary confinement.
In a DC dungeon, many of them under the most despicable and inhumane conditions, all because, of course, they were part of this, as you say, mostly peaceful protest, Rita.
Well, these are people who did not have guns in there. The only person who was killed there was Babbitt, who was a woman who was shot dead by...
Ashley Babbitt.
Babbitt by a DC police officer. So, and there was so much misinformation after this.
And have
so
they ever
much
caught
misinformation.
That guy? Has that guy ever been the policeman?
No, they said they're not charging him. They
didn't charge him. They almost gave him a parade, let alone charging him.
It's deeply.
And they put out all of these lies that I think, you know, some officer was bashed to death with a fire extinguisher. No, he just happened to have a heart attack tragically on the day.
I mean, there were certainly people who behaved terribly that day, who were rioting, who were committing acts of vandalism. But like you said, after that 2020 Summer of Love that we had from BLM, where we had $2 billion worth of damage, we had dozens of people killed, many more bashed. We saw businesses
Not only
and
that,
houses.
Rita. Sorry, Rita, I've got to stop you there because not only that, we saw a really violent Black Lives Matter riot on the steps of the White House. We saw an attempted arson of St. John's Church across from the White House. They didn't care. They didn't call that an insurrection. We have seen protesters storm state capitals across the country on behalf of all sorts of things, from the Palestinians to trans bills to whatever, and those aren't called insurrections. They don't care. The left does not care about the U.S. Capitol. They only care about these things when it serves their agenda to suddenly wrap themselves in the flag and say, oh, we defend democracy, we defend America. No, they don't care about that because the only democracy is when they use the words our democracy, which means vote for our guy or you're beyond the pale.
What we saw post-January 6th, I think, was the biggest example of disinformation, misinformation, gaslighting, whatever you want to call it, since
100%.
the 4 years plus of Russian collusion lies that were fed and just regurgitated by the media, including ours here in Australia, with no evidence, now entirely debunked, and now we actually see what those foreign links are, and it ain't with the Trump family. It's very much
and we're
the
still
Biden
going
family.
all the craziness of arresting Trump and all the charges. It's like a banana republic. The history of this period will reveal a lot more that we still only suspect actually happened. I want to move on to a hero here on the show, Poilievre. Rita? What's his name again? Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre.
We need more conservatives like him, with conviction, with backbone. Just says it like it is.
Here he is, another grab of Poilievre this week.
It's time for the NDP in this province to end the vaccine mandate so the nurses can go back.
So interesting. He's talking about making sure if he wins the next election, which I certainly hope he does, of basically making it illegal, vaccine mandates. And in particular, he's concerned about the nurses, those many nurses who were put out of work because they didn't want to have the vaccine. We've had the same thing here in Australia. We've had all sorts of people, first responders, paramedics, nurses, doctors, airline pilots. So many people lost their jobs because of the vaccine mandates. And an absolute disgrace in Australians' history because we should be valuing the right to choose, the right to take informed knowledge and make your own decisions. But what he's doing there, Poilievre, is fantastic. He's saying no mandates, that will be illegal, as it should be.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And those mandates extended to children in this country. Let's not forget, I remember in Victoria where they dropped the age from, I think, under 16 to under 13 or from under 18 to under 16. I have blocked out parts of it. But we had school children having to get changed on the pavement because they were trying to buy school uniforms and they were not allowed into the shop to try on the uniform. So they were getting changed on the pavement like some sort of a leper who's not allowed into shops. We did the same in Australia. In fact, we probably went further than just about anywhere else in the world.
And the joke is a study came out from Oxford University this week saying that basically the lockdowns, countries that locked down hard versus places like Sweden, which didn't, no difference, which we were saying on this show, by the way, in 2020, in 2021, in 2022. But anyway, Oxford University finally reached the same conclusion. After the break, we'll speak to Julie Hartman about the outrageous anti-Semitism sweeping the globe since October 7th and James's donkey vote. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, welcome back to the program. I'm James Morrow here, as always, with Rowan Algorithm Dean and Rita Screentime Panahy. Well, just when you thought the world couldn't get any stupider and social media any more of a sewer, along comes news that startled even cynical old me. You see, there's a new trend that is going viral on TikTok. You know, TikTok. That's the Chinese Communist Party-controlled social media app that seems to be designed to rot the brains of its mostly young users and hooks kids into going down a rabbit hole that starts with cat videos and makeup tips and ends up with them not knowing whether they're a boy or a girl and making Queers for Palestine banners while calling for world revolution. Have you got the sense that I don't like this app very much? Well, good. And after I show you this, guess what? I don't think you will either. You see, the new big thing on TikTok is for users to go and read Osama bin Laden's Letter to America, which is a self-justifying piece of jihadist trash with just enough midwit high school level anti-Americanism thrown in to get a certain sort of idiot saying, "Hey man, kinda makes you think." Now, we'll look at the letter and its contents in just a moment, but first, a bit of a sample of the genre, which has been highlighted by excellent social media accounts like Libs of TikTok.
It is just insane because this letter is so well written and so reasonably structured in an argument. Like, you got to present your findings, you got to state your cause, all of that. Like, everything he said was valid.
This morning I read Letter to America, which is Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. And I am ashamed to say that I not only have never read this letter, but I didn't even know this letter existed. It's wild, and everyone should read it. If you haven't read it yet, read it.
I need everyone to stop what they're doing right now and go read. It's literally 2 pages. Go read A Letter to America. And please come back here and just let me know what you think, because I feel like I'm going through like an existential crisis right now, and a lot of people are. So I just need someone else to be feeling this too.
I need you to stop what you're doing and go read A Letter to America. It is literally the craziest thing I've read in a while. And while I can't say that I'm that surprised, I am pretty shocked. So go read it and tell me what you think, because I really also need to talk to other people about this. And actually, before you even read the letter, I did want to mention, in reading the letter, I could only think of this tweet that I saw the other day. Under settler colonialism, any kind of resistance is branded as terrorist because the only acceptable violence is violence by the occupier.
So this is f***ing insane. I just read Osama bin Laden's Letter to America, which I will be going through right here, but it's actually so mind-f***ing to me that terrorism has been sold as this idea to the American people, and honestly just so many Western inhabitants within certain nations. It becomes apparent to me that the actions of 9/11 and those acts committed against the USA and its people were all just the buildup of our government failing other nations. My voice just wants to leave.
Welcome to the future, everybody, in which dead-eyed moral relativists who were brought up to hate their country by a rancid popular culture and an even worse school system come out and praise Osama bin Laden and justify the 9/11 terror attacks. So what on earth are these useful idiots praising? That's Lenin's phrase, obviously, and it applies here. Well, guess what? I've dug up a copy of Osama's letter to America and read it, as they suggested. It was released in 2002, a year after the 9/11 attacks, and I read it and I wondered, what the hell are all these kids so enthusiastic about? Maybe it was Osama's call for the West to embrace Islamic morality. Because in the letter, Osama bin Laden writes, quote, "We call you to be a people of manners, principles, honor, and purity, to reject the immoral acts of fornication and homosexuality," unquote. Yeah, boy, I bet those kids are all behind that. Or maybe it was the call to stop lending money with interest, i.e. usury. Because Osama also wrote, "You are the nation that permits usury, which has been forbidden by all the religions, yet you build your economy and investments on usury," unquote. Now, I don't think that's the case, that they'd be endorsing that, because I doubt any of those idiots we saw a moment ago paid cash for their facial piercings or tattoos. So what about the call to take women out of the workplace and turn them into domestic servants and baby-making machines hidden behind the walls of the family compound? Here Osama tells his readers, quote, "You are a nation that exploits women like consumer products or advertising tools, calling upon customers to purchase them. You use women to serve passengers, visitors, and strangers to increase your profit margins," unquote. So very feminist. Of course, remember, these were the same sorts of kids who last year were making TikToks slamming J.K. Rowling for defending women. Well, what are you going to do? Hang on, sorry. Went a little further, though, in the letter. I think I found it. It's the bit where Osama goes all woke and bangs on about white privilege, like, well, some overprivileged suburban TikTok kiddies do, writing, quote, "The freedom and democracy that you call to is for yourselves and for the white race only," unquote. The letter goes on, and of course, there's plenty of kvetching about Israel, with him saying the creation and continuation of Israel is one of the greatest crimes, and you are the leaders of its criminals. And of course, there is no need to explain and prove the degree of American support for Israel. The creation of Israel is a crime which must be erased, unquote. Well, that's really starting to get a bit on trend with some of these guys, but I swear, hearing these Jew-hating kidlets discover Osama bin Laden is like when a 12-year-old goes, "Hey, Dad, have you ever heard about this really cool band, the Rolling Stones?" And did you know also that Osama bin Laden may have killed 3,000 people, but he was also, according to the letter, an environmentalist? Yep, in the letter he wrote, quote, "You refuse to sign the Kyoto Agreement so that you can secure the profit of your greedy companies and industries," unquote. Now, he went on. He also called AIDS a satanic American invention, but what's a few conspiracy theories between friends? The point is, all of these TikTokers seek to essentially justify terrorism against the West and Israel through a very fashionable academic lens of decolonization and resistance. Now, here's what gets even more interesting. One, it is very likely that Osama bin Laden didn't write the letter himself, or at least that he had a lot of help from somebody called Adam Gadon, who was a California hippie who later converted to Islam and eventually hooked up with Al-Qaeda to become one of its chief spokesmen. On the way, he spent his time in the California school system and absorbed a ton of Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and other leftist academics whose work essentially created the foundation for the modern leftist academy. And here's the second bit. While TikTok has, since these TikToks came out, moved to, they say, ban such videos, sure, I believe you, millions wouldn't, the fact is that there have long been concerns that the TikTok app, which, although owned by China, is not allowed to be used by kids in China is being used here as a deliberate tool to suck in kids in the West, who by one estimate are on the app for as much as 91 minutes a day on average, and feed them endless scrolling content about everything from gender dysphoria to the evils of America. Now, the Australian government and many others have already banned TikTok from official government phones, but for whatever reason, I don't know, they've declined to ban the app from spying on and polluting the feeds of everyone else. Here's where I say parents and grandparents who are watching, you might need to step in on this, lest you spend Christmas dinner hearing about the joys of jihad and the evils of the West.
Fantastic, James. Well, the appalling butchery, murder, rape, etc., inflicted by Hamas on those poor women, girls, and people and families there outside Gaza, and the Israel's absolutely correct retaliation and determination to wipe out Hamas. Well, this has sparked a wave of anti-Semitism that we haven't seen since the Holocaust itself. As we've been saying on the show, university students are ditching class to avoid the abhorrent hatred. Well, this is what we've seen because of what's been happening in the universities. Some students are just having to leave. Jewish students are having to leave. Joining us to discuss all of this from the States, Salem News Channel host Julie Hartman. Julie, welcome to Outsiders. Great to have you on the show. We've had lots of people telling us they'd love to see you on our show. So thank you for coming on this morning. We've been talking about that letter to the Osama bin Laden letter. What's your take on what that? You've been a strong critic of American tertiary education. What's your take on it all?
Well, I am appalled by it, obviously, but I can't say that I'm surprised, having recently graduated from college and seeing the kind of indoctrination that is funneled at us daily. You know, on your analysis just a few minutes ago, which, by the way, was hilarious, it was both hilarious and also very depressing. You were talking about how Osama bin Laden, there was a line where Osama bin Laden was essentially saying that he disapproves in the strongest terms of homosexuality. And that always amazes me, how so many of these woke crusaders who are very big into gay rights and trans rights seem to support people like Osama bin Laden, Hamas, many of these leaders, which would and do eradicate gay people. And I think that indicates that there is a doublethink. There is such a contradictory way of thinking that is manifest among college students. That's one of the examples, but we see it with regard to every single issue. We see it with, the left is very pro-women, but then they won't define what a woman is. That's right. They say that drilling for fossil fuels is bad, but drilling for electric-powered vehicle parts is good. So I just want to point out this double thing that we have to highlight in order to combat.
Absolutely. Rita?
Well, there is this hierarchy of victimhood, isn't there, with the left? And it looks like Islamists are on top of the LGBT community when it comes to this, because when those two values clash, we know who's winning. Has there been much of a fight back in the US on university campuses? Because I know it's shocked a lot of the donors just how deep-seated this hatred is. Has there been a counteroffensive?
There has. In some ways, yes. At my own alma mater, Harvard, we have seen CEOs like Bill Ackman, he's a Harvard alum, be very forceful in his condemnation, of the students. We've seen donors at the University of Pennsylvania pull their money. But frankly, I view this as too little, too late. Although I'm very happy with the donors and with the individuals who are finally taking a stand. My question for them is, why has it taken you until now to identify this cancer?
Absolutely. James.
Also, Julie, I'm just wondering, about whether or not, because a lot of what we've seen here, and, we're very, very big free speech, anti-cancel culture people on this show, but stuff that we have seen really intimidating demonstrations. We saw that incident at Harvard where there was a bunch of students who surrounded a Jewish student and were screaming shame, shame, shame at him, not letting him leave. There was some really bad incidents where students were basically prevented from going to class at MIT. At MIT the other day, the administration basically admitted that they wouldn't suspend any students who participated in these things because it might jeopardize their visa status. Does this tell us that the tail, I guess, is maybe wagging the dog a bit when it comes to discipline and actually creating the safe space that these campuses claim to be, where microaggressions are policed, but really blatant, violent, threatening anti-Semitism is, well, we're going to let that one slide because we wouldn't want to jeopardize anybody's visa.
Yes, I mean, it's another great example of the doublethink that I was trying to highlight earlier, where we see so many contradictions. Again, this focus on safe spaces, but then if it's a Jewish student that is being taunted and harassed, that student doesn't need a safe space. It is ridiculous. It is sick. And what it indicates is that these individuals who are social justice crusaders, they don't believe in anything. Again, this contradictory element of their thinking indicates that their ideology is hollow. It is a rancid, anti-Semitic, bigoted ideology. And even to call it an ideology is giving it too much credit. It is hollow. And we need to recognize that, again, in order to combat it.
And Julie, I'll just play you this clip. You're absolutely right on the doublethink, and we've been talking on the show earlier about how where are the women's marches, where are the women's support, the Me Too movement, supporting all those horrific women, all those horrific things that happened to the poor women and girls on October 7th. Just have a look at this news clip.
The women we saw were not just killed, they were cruelly mutilated in many parts of their bodies.
Women's groups say the humiliation women experienced as they were paraded through the street, thrown on the backs of motorcycles, and degraded either before or after they were killed at the festival. That also constitutes gender-based violence.
So on your doublethink, Julie, where are all the pop stars, where are all those influencers, those Hollywood celebrities, the usual women we hear endlessly from the moment, some man has said the wrong thing or whatever? Where are they in terms of what happened on October 7th?
Well, here's the deal. Women's groups, I'm putting that in quotation marks, care about women the way that communists cared about workers. They didn't care about women. Women's groups don't care about women. And we see this here in the United States. LGBTQ groups are pro-Palestine. They don't care about LGBTQ individuals. If they did, they would be condemning Hamas. Black Lives Matter claims to want to protect and defend Black people in this country. But the policies that they have implemented have ruined Black communities. So again, these groups are hollow, shallow shams of groups, and they speak in the name of these groups, women, Black people, LGBTQ, in order to get power. They manipulate those groups, those minority statuses, and claim to care about them really to bolster themselves personally and professionally. That's really what's going on.
100%. Julie Hartman, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. We'll chat to you again. It's been a real pleasure having you here on the show. And after the break, Ice Age Watch goes on the psychiatrist's couch. About time too. Hello and welcome to Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics. Ice Age Watch, the show that likes to cast a skeptical eye, indeed a satirical eye, over the more extremist claims and alarmist predictions of the global boiling lobby. But what happens when your prediction does not come true? We have decided to take a Freudian approach to this phenomenon, which we have decided to refer to as predictive dissonance. Predictive dissonance can be defined as the stressful emotional experience an individual may feel when the prediction they made with such confidence does not come true. There are many examples of predictive dissonance and how sufferers cope. In 2016, many people, in fact, everybody other than this show, confidently predicted that Hillary Clinton would be elected president. When that prediction failed to come true, predictive dissonance set in. But how does predictive dissonance actually work? Here is the BBC quoting climate professor Wisław Masłowski, telling the American Geophysical Union that the Arctic could be ice-free in summer within 5 or 6 years. Now that is a very scary idea. All that ice melting, but actually it turns out that this is a classic case of predictive dissonance because fortunately Professor Wisław Masłowski made that prediction back in 2007. And the prediction was supposed to come true by 2013. It's now over a decade later, and no, that prediction has not come true. Indeed, according to the National Snows and Ice Data Centre, 2023 this year was, quote, an odd summer, yes, and July was, quote, only the 12th lowest in the satellite record. At month's end, ice concentrations were low north of the Laptev Sea. However, the northern sea route and the Northwest Passage retained considerable ice and, quote, it is clear that the southern route, known as Amundsen's route through the Northwest Passage, is still choked with ice. Choked with ice, not exactly ice-free, as was predicted. So here's Professor Wisław Masłowski. I thought we should put him on the couch to discuss his feelings about what went wrong with his personal predictions.
And we've had some changes in the rate of global warming, for example, globally, not just only in the Arctic. We had changes in the amount of heat delivered by atmosphere and the ocean to the Arctic, and so forth. So the bottom line is that projections are maybe useful as a warning, but they're not necessarily as accurate as you wish to be when you talk about predictions.
Yes, trends, modelling, global warming, changes. It can get very discombobulating, especially when the planet stubbornly refuses to live up to those predictions.
Just to be clear, the trends flattened out a bit instead of continuing.
So first of all, I would point that a trend was based on a relatively short time record.
There you have it. Short time frames can be a serious problem, or making your predictions without sufficient data over a sufficient length of time. In this case, it would appear that the professor may have something worse, but also incredibly common, and he may be suffering from a bout of premature prediction. Premature prediction is one of the most common phenomenon amongst global boiling activists, and it frequently happens to not only males, but male professors. Here's another example.
Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river system. Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river system.
Yes, poor old Professor Tim Flannery, or at least his reputation, never fully recovered from that case of premature prediction. Since then, Warragamba Dam, for instance, has regularly been full to overflowing, and they are now talking of building an even higher to hold all that water. Professor Flannery made that false prediction, weirdly enough, also back in 2007. Must have been something in the water that year. Oh, hang on. No, there wasn't any water, was there? According to the professor. But 2007 was definitely a year for false messiahs, being the year that the Australian people elected this man as their Prime Minister.
Climate change is the great moral challenge of our generation.
Greatest moral challenge of our time. Not rampant anti-Semitism, not Russian expansionism, not poverty and malnutrition in the third world, not unfettered illegal immigration, not a nuclear-armed Iran, not the slavery of the Uyghurs by China or the brutality of Islamists in Africa and the Middle East, not safeguarding Taiwan, not the disintegration of Western societies. No, no, no. The great moral challenge our generation faces, according to Kevin Rudd, is climate change. Coming to a coastline near you any day soon, thanks to one of Prime Minister Rudd's hand-picked team. This man, with clowns like these laying out our moral, let alone our economic challenges, no wonder we are in so much strife today. But I digress. premature prediction is really just a manifestation of a deeper problem that afflicts many within the global boiling alarmist community, and that we can confidently refer to as predictile dysfunction. Yes, predictile dysfunction is when you keep insisting something over and over again, yet what the casual observer observes is at odds with your insistent prediction.
The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived.
Yes, that's United Nations Secretary General and former socialist Antonio Guterres speaking from the United Nations swanky headquarters in Geneva earlier this year, proclaiming that the era of global boiling has arrived. Sounds like Antonio is suffering from a definitive case of premature prediction to me. After all, it's only a short drive from Geneva up into the European Alps, in which, funnily enough, is currently enjoying bumper snowfalls. According to the climate skeptic website Electroverse, quote, in many parts of the Alps, snow totals have actually exceeded 6 feet, which has led big-name resorts in France, Switzerland, Italy and Austria bringing their opening dates of the 2023-24 season forward by at least a week to November 18. According to Ian McIlrae, Managing Director of Ski Solutions holiday company, quote, this will ensure a solid base for the winter ahead, and with a lot more snow in the forecast, it's shaping up to be one of the best starts to the winter ski season that I can remember. Quote, incredible snowfalls, up to 150 centimetres in Val Thorens, gushed the Genesis Watchman report excitedly on Twitter. Meanwhile, also according to Electroverse, despite some areas in the States recording record high temperatures in November, quote, the first half of November has been one of the chilliest ever across New England states such as Maine. Looking to the past 30 years of climate data, first half of November 2023 has come out as the second coldest. The second coldest at 38.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, if you think you too are suffering from premature prediction or any other form of predictive dysfunction brought on by extremist climate alarmism, well, what would the Thompson twins say? Lefty lunacy, so much of it around. Rita, there's a Labor councillor who had to stand down. What's she done?
Well, no, she's only stepped down from the board of a Jewish preschool after parents found her secret X account, formerly Twitter, which was retweeting all sorts of pro-Hamas or Hamas apologist content. I think she was saying things like Republicans are more scary than Hamas, and also absolving the group of war crimes. What is strange is that she's actually converted to Judaism in recent history.
Here's that double think Julie was thinking about. There you go.
But she seems to be an anti-Zionist Jew.
There you go.
Well, there's being an anti-Zionist Jew, but then there's also retweeting things that say, you know, the West is the real problem and Hamas, you know, is justified with this.
Well, we saw in Melbourne as well more of this there was Palestinian convoy turning up, and here we go.
This is really,
James?
Yeah, look, this is in front of a Jewish, I think, bakery or delicatessen or restaurant in Melbourne here, and you see this
Fitzroy Street, St
Fitzroy
Kilda.
Street, St Kilda, sorry. And, you know, again, with the pro-Palestinian flags, with the Quranic pickup truck there, you know, all of this stuff here is designed, frankly, to intimidate. You know, it's this, we see this over and over again. People going into the eastern suburbs of Sydney, happening in suburbs in Melbourne, heavily Jewish areas, with their flags, with their signs, honking, shouting, you know. And this is one of those things where they use our free speech against us because it's very intimidatory. I've talked to a lot of Jewish families who are very, very concerned. They feel very nervous when these guys come through the neighborhood. There was an incident at North Bondi here in Sydney earlier this week where it started a fight. This is not responsible behavior. And, you know, and the one thing that also needs to be talked about here is this is not, both sidesism here. There's only one side that is really engaging in really provocative acts when it comes to this conflict on the streets.
From the river to the sea is inciting hatred. It's
Absolutely.
inciting hatred. And inciting hatred is the red line in free speech. If your free speech, which is fine, is out there, which is to be applauded, is out there inciting hatred of other people and inciting genocide of other people, which is what From the River to the Sea is doing.
And
No
yet,
less
Rowan,
than Sieg Heil or anything else.
The government allowed a bunch of people to scream F the Jews and gas the Jews at the Opera House before Israel had even begun to retaliate for those attacks. We know what's going on.
Well, we know this isn't happening with both sides, even here in Australia. We're not having Orthodox Jews put a convoy together with inflammatory signs and going to Lakemba and trying to intimidate people going about their business. So this is not... let's see it for what it is. And there's been multiple incidents in Melbourne too. I know there's a number of Jewish families who've had to bring in private security, step up security. That's how concerned they are about their personal safety.
Well, on a better note, in Brisbane today, in fact, there is a pro-Israel march, which, here we go. You can look that up if you want to attend that. Anzac Stand with Israel. So, well done. And there will be a 200-man haka. And we've seen some great footage of the hakas, the pro-Israeli hakas. OK, now let's also talk about a bit of... this is just, we haven't really concentrated as much as we should on the whole energy saga. But we have the news now that India has announced that it hopes to jack up its coal production by 70% by 2027. So in other words, they are busily, like China and India are massively increasing the amount of coal production, much of which I'm glad to say will come from us and we'll sell it to them, which is great. But this insanity of net zero and renewables in this country, cannot do anything for the climate. If you believe in that sort of stuff, it can't do anything. And yet we are and destroying our own.
It's so funny because like here in Sydney, a lot of councils, including my own, well done Inner West Council, they're making everybody pick out their food and put that in a separate rotting food bin to compost and be taken out of landfill because they think that this is actually going to impact the climate. No, I'm sorry, this is really where it gets just to the point of religious lunacy.
Well, the religious lunacy comes every time I order a drink and it's got a paper straw inside it. I mean, how crazy are we that we have just got along with that? Paper!
And no plastic bags at the shops either.
Absolutely. Well, get it. Well, as I say, if you want to pre-order my book, pre-order it at wilkinsonpublishing.com.au.
What does that have to do with climate?
Off you go, because there's only a limited number of copies available before Christmas. Only a limited print run. Order it before Christmas if you want to get it in. wilkinsonpublishing.com.au. And we'll see you next Sunday here on Outsiders, as we do every Sunday. Rita and James during the week. See you on Sunday. Bye.